Thing 1, 2, 1. Thanks for coming inside on a pretty cold day, making it up here. And just always curious, how many people is it their first time here? Excellent. We always like to see newbies. And please sign up for our digital newsletter, which is a free service, and you'll find out what we're doing. So, and this is the first of our several lectures that will be happening. We don't have all the details on them. And again, the best way would be to sign up for the digital newsletter to get them. Many of you probably already do get them. This talk today, we're very proud that we're doing it, and it is connected with our exhibit, which is always a little hard to see when we have people in the room, but I just want to give a special recognition to Holly Metz, who curated the exhibit. So many people have come in complimenting the text, which Holly, it's all original research, and then it was put together. We also have McKevin Shaughnessy in the room, who is he is the designer of the exhibit, and other support staff helped with that. So I don't want to go on too long. We have a really special guest, and I'm not sure if I call you doctor. Can I do that? No, she's very informal, but is very credentialed. And so Terry Doss is a restoration ecologist, and she serves as the director and chief restorator scientist for the Meadowlands Research and Restoration Institute, which she serves as the scientific arm for the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority. So without further ado, let's give a very warm welcome to Terry, and she's got a great set of slides.
Thank you. Oops, can you hear me? Good. Thank you and good afternoon. I really, as was mentioned, I know it's a cold day outside and it's tough to get out, so I really do appreciate you making your way here. And I want to start off by thanking the folks here at the Hoboken Historical Museum for setting up this beautiful exhibit. When I found out about it, I was really excited, but it's kind of my thing, the meadows. For some more perspectives about the meadows, I do encourage you to come out for Bill Sheehan's lecture. He's the Hackensack River Keeper, and he's got a lot of real interesting stories about the meadows. And then I believe sometime in May, Don Torino from the Bergen County Audubon Society will be giving a tour of the Harrier Meadows, which is one of the Meadowlands' most special places. And no one knows the Meadowlands like Don Torino does, so I highly encourage you to attend. So I'm hoping that my talk today will provide a little bit of background for those future events. And this photo that you see, it was taken from the top of one of our landfills. We call it 1E. It's a real beautiful name. It's located in North Arlington, and this is looking east towards the Sawmill Creek Wildlife Management Area. Is this a pointer? Yes. And right here you see Snake Hill, which also is known as Laurel Hill now. And in the distance, you have Secaucus, Hoboken, Jersey City, and then New York City. And so one of the perks of my job is I get to go on top of these beautiful they're now beautiful landfills, and take these great photos. So my goal today is to tell you a little bit about the history of the Meadowlands, to provide a sense of how we ended up where we are today. I'll then provide you all with a quick update on the current conditions of the Meadowlands, and then based on both that past and current conditions, talk a little bit about where we're headed for the future. And I'm hoping to leave you all with two takeaways. First, a deep appreciation for the miracle that is the Meadowlands. Despite all the abuses that have been thrown at it over the years, it still persists and provides us with so many benefits. Once, after a talk that I gave to a group of scientists about how the Meadowlands continues to persist and thrive, despite all the abuses thrown at it over time, a guy walked up and he said, "Wow, the Meadowlands are really badass." So I hope that you'll all agree after today and remember that, in fact, the Meadowlands really are badass. The other takeaway, and it kind of goes along with what Holly put together, is I want to impart on you that words do matter. Language changes our consciousness, so the stories that we tell each other and that we tell ourselves really matter, especially in these confusing times where our attention is constantly being diverted by the marketplace of ideas. Words matter. And this holds true particularly for the Meadowlands. Too often, when people talk about the Meadowlands, they talk about the historical pollution, the landfills, or the place where Jimmy Hoffa might be buried. And when you read these historic accounts, you'll see that the vision of the meadows at that time comes shining through. You hear terms like unproductive wastelands, forbidding wild areas, and breeding places for disease. So moving forward, we need to collectively find and use the words that can connect, that can create this strong connection to nature, and that can inspire and heal all of us and our communities and help others understand why these special areas are so important to protect. Oops, I'm not sure which way I need to go. So typically when you do say the word Meadowlands, this is what most people envision, the MetLife Stadium. The millions of people speeding by on the turnpike and riding the train into the city or flying over often overlook the full extent of the Meadowlands and all of its natural resources. What they don't see are the many threatened and endangered species that live right in these open spaces around the stadium. And they don't even find the amazing areas that are hidden within. And all of the benefits that we as humans derive from these meadows. I really like this graphic from Thomas Usurki's book, The Meadowlands, a Wetland Survival Story. It really illustrates the Meadowlands as an oasis of green in amongst a wide swath of urban developed land. This green area represents this green area represents some of the last of our natural infrastructure in amongst all of this human infrastructure. And as a side note, a copy of Thomas Usurki's book is upstairs in the museum's collection. And I was also pleased to learn that they had hosted an exhibit on his work a couple years back. Today, the Meadowlands is defined by its political boundary, which it's really not a natural boundary. It is just a line that was drawn by some politicians. And it encompasses part of 14 different towns surrounding the meadows. My agency, the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority, serves as the regional planning and zoning agency for the 30 square mile district that remains. It used to be something like 50 square miles. And the stated mandate of my department, the Meadowlands Research and Restoration Institute, is to protect the delicate balance of nature. And we do this through research and restoration. As mentioned, I serve as the director, and as someone who's really interested in how nature and urban areas can peacefully and successfully exist, I feel like I'm definitely in the right place. I became interested in wetlands because they are this weird thing. They're both land and sea, literally where the land meets the sea. They're always changing. They're known, but really unknown. They're settled, but always shifting. And they allow for these expansive views of the grasses, the wildlife, the sea, the sky. But because they are both land and sea, they were really misunderstood, kind of like the underdog of habitats. So it's important that we let people know why they are so important and all the many benefits that they provide to humans. But too often these benefits are not clearly understood until they're gone. People's houses start to flood and they wonder why. And in Hoboken, we found out why. People often think that we're only protecting wetlands because of the wildlife habitat that they provide, but humans need them for all the reasons that are listed here, particularly in light of climate change. So to understand how we've lost so many of these important areas over time, I'm going to start at the beginning, which for the Meadowlands is really not that long ago. Relative to planet Earth, the Meadowlands that we know today are quite young. The features that we see were formed by the last glacial period, which was just about 20,000 years ago. So to understand these changes that occurred since that last glacial period, I've broken the time down into these 5 periods, and then woven throughout these periods are these different forces that directed the shape of these changes. The physical, geological, and chemical forces that started it all and continue to affect the Meadowlands today. The different human activities that modify the natural environments, the political economy that affected these modifications at any point in time, and last, the human beliefs and ideas that drove the actions over time. These forces will continue to evolve as we move forward, and that's why it's so important that we use the right words and develop interesting stories to help positively shape the future of the Meadowlands. Prior to human intervention, the Meadowlands was a wide expanse of marsh and cedar swamp. Today, I brought a map that was created by Eric Sanderson. It's back on the cabinet, and it's how they envision how the New York Bay and its environs appeared hundreds of years ago, based on a lot of research that he and his team have undertaken to inform the map. It envisions a time when there was very little human impact on the land. And a lot of this work is based on information from geologists who have taken a lot of deep soil and sediment cores from which they read the history. And they read that history through radiocarbon dating to verify when different events actually occurred, like when the first Paleo-Indians arrived on the scene. The geologists have determined that the area we now know as the Meadowlands was created from the scarring from at least 3 advancing glacier ice sheets. The last of these, the Wisconsin ice sheet, moved across the area as far south as Perth Amboy about 20,000 years ago. So it's hard to see, but this really is what that area, and these are the different areas around. Here's the Great Swamp out here. You can see Long Island out that way. The Hackensack Valley served as this main corridor for the glacier because it was a little bit lower in elevation than the surrounding areas, and then that glacier kind of pounded it down over time. When a general warming trend occurred about 20,000 to 17,000 BC, the glacier started to retreat, and that's when glacial Lake Hackensack began to form. And the lake was impounded by a terminal moraine at Perth Amboy. So all of the area that we know was the Meadows was submerged by this Lake Hackensack. And then about 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, or 10 to 9,000 BC, the Pleistocene megafauna, like mastodons, vanished for reasons that are still not really understood. Their extinction seemed to coincide with the arrival of Paleo-Indians. About 10,000 years ago, somewhere around 8,000 BC, the terminal moraine was breached and the sea levels continued rising with the melting of the glaciers, and Lake Hackensack drained into the Atlantic Ocean, and that's when the Hackensack and Passaic rivers were formed. I think I missed a slide. Well, I guess I'm still on this one. Sorry for that. After the lake was drained, that's what remained was this level wetland with stands of lowland forest and grassy wet meadows. And then about 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, rising sea levels finally reached that elevation at the narrow outlet of the Hackensack at Kilvan Cole and Arthur Kill, and that's when the rivers became tidal. And then as sea levels continued to rise, we got this stronger connection, and the saltwater waters started to move into the Hackensack River and the Passaic River, and that produced the environment that pretty much exists for the most part up to the present time. So before the Europeans arrived in the 1600s, the site was inhabited by a civilization known as the Hackensacks of the Lenni Lenape tribes. Hackensack comes from this word that I'm not even going to try, or Ackensack, which means stony ground. More exactly, this stony ground is Teaneck Ridge, which formed the backbone of a lobe of land once called Old Hackensack Neck. The Hackensacks occupied the necks of land around Newark Bay, and then to the north and northwest to the heads of the tide on the Passaic and the Hackensack rivers. So most of what we know about these peoples are from accounts from early European settlers. So unfortunately, these accounts were tainted by the beliefs and values of these Europeans. However, what is believed is that these tribes relied on the resources of the estuary and the marshes and the lands around the estuary, but that their use had little impact on the natural resources since their settlements were transitory and they moved along the estuary with the seasons. It wasn't until the 1600s that we really started to see the meadows changed by human interactions. Excuse me for 1 second. So this map and indigenous place names was developed by a gentleman known as Kevin Wright, and he provides us with background on how many of the places we now know were named. I have a copy of one of Mr. Wright's manuscripts where he goes through the history and prehistory of the Meadowlands. So a lot of the information that I've gained is from his work. But you can almost, it's hard to see the map, I apologize, but you can see here's San Hekins Firemaker, which includes the Hackensacks. I'm not going to go down the list because I'd probably mispronounce everything. But it is, I'll leave a copy of this presentation with Holly so you can check this out at your leisure. As you can see from this drawing from 1656, new names began to appear on the maps of the meadows, reflecting the origins of the new settlers. This illustration includes settlements around the rivers and creeks, which began to alter the landscape. In the historical accounts from that time, the people and lands that they found here were described using words that reflected their cultural beliefs, with words like savages and waste reedy land. Also documented in the records around 1740 was the withdrawal of the Lenape tribes from their homelands into the interior of Pennsylvania, which at that time were still wild. Around this time, the use of the land started to change dramatically. This period of early American capitalism saw a shift where the main focus in the region was on distributing title of the lands to private individuals. The government set up a legal system whereby the owners could develop the land in pretty much in any way they wanted. The whole idea for developing the land was to increase productivity because these wastelands were seen as unproductive. And the new settlers came up with many creative ways to do so. So for the meadows, what this meant was reclaiming or draining the lands so that they could be farmed for salt hay, building berms and tie gates and dams to keep the waters in or out, depending on what they were trying to achieve, ditching wetlands to prevent mosquitoes, dredging the rivers and creeks to allow for better boat passage, and filling the wetlands so they could develop more roads and railways and settlements. Old documents discuss efforts to frustrate the tide and the ubiquitous muskrat, and celebrate the new rail lines that allowed for much better transportation to and from New York City. Oops, there it is. And develop new techniques to ditch the marshes, which they believed were carrying all kinds of diseases, but particularly mosquito-borne diseases. And then by the late 1800s, historical paintings and writings began to document the diminishing natural resources due to the overuse of the Meadowlands for different purposes. Fortunately, we do know that we still have some rail species breeding in the Meadowlands, so they weren't able to hunt those birds to extinction. One of our favorite tools for understanding the past is this historical topographic map of the Meadowlands created by topographic engineer C.C. Vermeulen in 1896. And a copy of the map is here. And I'll leave that one for y'all. The total acreage of the Newark and Hackensack Meadows at that time was calculated by Vermeulen as slightly less than 43 square miles. And that's mainly because we had already lost the meadows where Hoboken and Jersey City now exist. And these meadows extended from Hackensack to the north all the way to Elizabeth to the south. So in the southern part of the map, we have the Newark Meadows. And so that is now known as the Port Newark Elizabeth, Newark Liberty International Airport, the New Jersey Turnpike, and so much other urban infrastructure. From this map, it's also evident that the northern part of the Meadowlands was still primarily a freshwater system because it shows Atlantic white cedar swamps in a few areas, and Atlantic white cedars can only survive in fresh waters. So it might be tough to see, but these areas are called out as Atlantic white cedar swamps. But one area where we know Atlantic white cedar swamps was in the Sawmill Creek area, and that is not shown on this map. Oops, I just messed that up. There we go. So this is Sawmill Creek, and you don't see any Atlantic white cedars around there, but we know that they used to be there because we can see their old stumps. So that what that means is that the fresh water had already been pushed upriver, and the salt wedge from Newark Bay was already moving into that area. And so why that occurred was because all of the freshwater tributaries from the north, east, and west were cut off or started to get cut off. And that increased the saltwater influence from Newark Bay. And so we know that this change occurred very quickly because there are documents dated about 1820 that describe water so fresh at the mouths of Passaic and Hackensack rivers that the cattle could drink from them. So this is the old cedar stumps that are still present out at Sawmill Creek that you can see at low tide. Another source of information as to how and when changes occurred in the meadows are from a number of plant studies that were conducted from 1819 up through 1971. The first study that we know of, conducted by Torrey in 1819, documented primarily vegetation typically found in bogs with acidic-loving plants dominating throughout, so it must have been very fresh. As the river-to-ocean connection strengthened due to the lessening of freshwater inputs, the meadows were found by Britain in 1889 to have begun to be less acidic, and more higher pH species were found like the Atlantic white cedars. By 1919, when Harshberger and Burns conducted their flora studies, saltwater had begun to move upriver after a lot of ditching and diking had occurred. There were still freshwater plants found in the most northern areas, but not very many trees at all. And then by 1949, Husser found that saltwater species were dominant. And lastly, by the time Bill Sipple conducted his studies as part of his master's thesis at the University of Penn in 1971, he found very few freshwater species, and the system looked much more like what we see today in terms of the dominant plants and habitats. He was also the first to really focus in on the landfilling and pollution, which were found to be really drastically changing the conditions of the meadows. So after attempts to make these wastelands more productive through farming were found to be fruitless, other ways were found to make the land more productive. This article from 1901 uses amazing language to describe this particular plan: to create a city in the meadows. To make the desert bloom like the rose sounds like a miracle, yet it can be done with irrigation. An equal wonder would be the creation of a big city between the Hackensack and Passaic rivers, where now there is naught but a vast stretch of salt marsh, practically called meadow. These plans to reclaim the meadows also brought industry and pollution, as well as landfills. And some of these landfills were amazing engineering feats, but many were much smaller, they weren't really regulated, and they often weren't properly closed. So by the late 1960s, the Meadowlands were home to 1,900 acres of unregulated garbage dumps where an estimated 5,000 tons of trash was deposited each day from New York City and 188 New Jersey towns. Conditions became so bad that in 1962, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service declared in a letter to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that the meadows are not at this time of any significance to fish and wildlife. Also happening around this time was the emergence of new voices and news stories, which helped to shift views about our environment and the importance of protecting it, which resulted not only in the first celebration of Earth Day on April 23, 1970, but also new regulations protecting our water, our air, and our lands. But unfortunately, we had already lost so much of the meadows. By 1968, when the Hackensack Meadowlands Development Commission was created as an independent state agency, about 3/4 of the original meadows had been lost. This graphic, which was developed by ironically, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, shows a series of maps of the district from 1889 to 1995. The green areas are wetland, and you can see these areas diminishing through time, while the blue areas indicating water and the white areas indicating developed land are both increasing. When the Hackensack Meadowlands Development Commission was initially created, their mandate was to provide for the reclamation, planning, development, and redevelopment of the Hackensack Meadowlands, noting that the swampland was a land resource of opportunity for new homes, jobs, and recreational sites. Fortunately, in 2001, the HMDC took on a greener role and removed the name development from their title, becoming the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission, with renewed goals of protecting the delicate balance of nature in the Meadowlands. But then in 2015, the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission combined with the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority to create the agency that we are today. But even with this new name change, our mandate to protect the meadows still remains. So our agency has been monitoring biotic and abiotic conditions in the Meadowlands from the start. So we have about 45 years of data documenting the changing conditions, not only of the air and water, but also of the fish and wildlife. And we use a lot of different technologies to track these changes, like gauges that take water and air quality measurements and water elevations. We use drones, all types of different maps. We measure carbon. And while these abiotic parameters provide clear indications of better air and water quality, I really believe that it's the wildlife that provides us with the clearest picture of how ecological conditions have improved in the Meadowlands. One of the newest technologies for monitoring wildlife are acoustic recording units, or ARUs. The ARUs are changing the game for how we collect wildlife data, as we're now able to observe hard-to-find wildlife in the Meadowlands. There are species that we have little data for because they are so hard to find. And so using these ARUs, we've been able to not only detect such hard-to-find species like tricolored bat, Atlantic coast leopard frogs, salt marsh sparrows, and secretive marsh birds, we've also been able to estimate their population sizes. And all of these species of concern are a testament to the improved habitat conditions of the Meadowlands, as they require clean land, air, and water to survive. The Meadows is now home to many raptors, such as bald eagles, peregrine falcons, and osprey. This is one of our first eagles that was ever born in the Meadowlands. Fish and Wildlife Service came up to tag it, and I got to help. We have so many raptors now in the Meadowlands that, in fact, their populations, they're fighting each other to get the right nesting areas. So some of the work that we do is to try to assist these populations to increase their breeding. So one thing that we do is build osprey nesting platforms around the district, and I'm happy to report that this effort has been successful. Just last year, in 2024, we counted the highest number of chicks born in the district of all time, and so we had 24 chicks last year. We've also been studying diamondback terrapins, which weren't even present in the Meadowlands until about 50 years ago. We don't know specifically when they arrived in the Meadowlands or even how they got here. And we're trying to figure all that out is one aspect of our research. But what we do know from our mark and recapture data is that the Meadowlands terrapin are surviving long-term within the district. Just last summer, we recaptured one of the earliest terrapin that we had tagged. And so the cages that we use, we know that the terrapin have to be about 3 or 4 years of age for us to even capture them. And so this particular terrapin had been tagged about 15 years ago, which means it's anywhere from 15 to 20 years of age. And we also know that terrapin live in the wild till about 25 years. So this tells us that these terrapin are not only in the Meadowlands, but they're thriving. And by looking at their population, we know they're reproducing successfully. So all of this is a success story, because if you think about terrapin, they live down in the sediments, which is really where all the pollution starts to accumulate. So there's been enough time that's passed that the cleaner sediments have built up on top of the polluted sediments, and we have the wildlife to attest for that. One of our longest running research projects is our bird banding station, which is set up. We have 2 stations, one in a wetland and one in an adjacent landfill. And our banding data shows very similarly to the terrapin data that the Meadowlands are thriving and that migratory species are successfully using the Meadowlands as a stopover site. But also we have a number of birds that are living their full lives here. Similar to the terrapins, we recaptured, sorry, I can't remember what type of bird, but they're all songbirds. We recaptured a songbird that had been tagged previously about 9 years. And when we gave that data to the authorities that oversee all of this, they were like, "Are you sure? That's pretty long for a bird to live." So again, we know our wildlife is thriving. Another long-standing research project is our fish survey. We've been conducting this since the early 1980s. We do it about every 10 years, and right now we're in our 4th iteration. So these charts present a comparison of the results over time and indicate a growing diversity of species. When the study first began, 85% of the catch was mummichugs, which are a species that can tolerate high levels of pollution. Our most recent results indicate much more diversity, with over 60 species observed in our latest study and many more coastal species than we've ever seen before in the Meadowlands. We found that the fish are thriving, populations are growing, and biodiversity continues to increase. And in addition to the fish, we're seeing a lot of oysters and anemones, which were not common in the past and which represent species that are definitely not pollution tolerant. Oysters are often called a keystone species, so having these present and healthy here in the Meadowlands is a sign of cleaner water. And we're also finding oyster spat, which is that little guy right there. And having those presents shows us that the oysters are healthy enough to reproduce, which is also, again, another sign of clean water. And we just found this out this past summer. It's the first time we found spat in the Meadowlands, so we're real excited about that. So given this picture of the abuses from the past and this much more optimistic current conditions, I'd like to finish my talk with a look towards the future, towards the work that we're undertaking to assist in the recovery of the meadows. And there is an urgency to this restoration, because despite all this good news that I've been talking about, there's still a lot of stressors to the system. We're still losing hundreds of acres of valuable wetland across the United States, primarily due to sea level rise. There's impacts from storm events that continue to increase fragmentation and changes in the structure of our ecosystems. Also, increased temperatures and extreme events negatively affect our native plant and wildlife species and create better conditions for invasive plant and wildlife species. And there's a host of non-climatic threats that are always threatening the meadows: continued development pressures, ongoing pollution, and even competing recreational activities. And we can see our wetlands eroding literally in front of our eyes on a daily basis. So to develop our restoration plans, we start with the wildlife. The changes to the meadows have created coastal conditions that attract coastal species, but many of these coastal species really can't find the proper habitat here to breed successfully. So we developed a Meadowlands Wildlife Action Plan that focuses on some key wildlife species. And from there, we developed our habitat priorities and came up with a set of projects to assist in the recovery of a variety of habitats spread throughout the district. So we have brackish tidal marshes, freshwater marshes. This is one of our biggest freshwater marshes, floodplain grasslands and woods up in the north, and coastal grasslands, which are spread throughout. And I'll talk a little bit about those. I can't, there's not enough time in the day for me to tell you about all of our different projects and all of the possibilities and opportunities for restoration in the Meadowlands. There's so many, but I will tell you about one of our biggest restoration projects, which hopefully will be taking place in the Sawmill Creek Wildlife Management Area. We received federal funds from NOAA as part of a $72.4 million grant awarded to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Under this 5-year grant, if it's not yanked away by DOGE, we have $6.5 million to try various techniques to renourish the tidal marshes, plant native grasses, and strengthen the shorelines to enhance and restore wetland functions that existed before colonial times. Obviously, we can't restore what was once there because it was freshwater. We can never bring back the Atlantic white cedars in that area. But we can restore the structures and functions once found there, as well as the habitat for terrapin and other wildlife that are relatively new to the system. These maps show some of the loss of marsh within the sawmill area, which was caused by berming of the area back in the 1800s for farming purposes. These berms cut off the tides, and the peat that was there in the wetland shrunk as it dried, which caused the land to subside. Once the land was found to be unproductive as farmland, the upkeep of the berms was abandoned, and then in 1950, a nor'easter blew through and destroyed the berms. And since the peats had dried and the land was now lower, much of the site turned into mudflat. And then to further, insult to injury, the development of the western spur of the New Jersey Turnpike in the 1960s, which is this corridor right here, that caused further fragmentation. So now much of the vegetated areas are open water and mudflat, and that's what the blue represents. So this once entirely intact wetland is mostly all gone. As recently as the 1980s, the marsh was still largely intact. This is a view from the eastern spur of the New Jersey Turnpike, which fortunately was built very high off the ground. But just a few decades later, I'm sorry? That is not the one being replaced, but it's kind of the sister to the one that is being replaced. This is at the end of what will become the New Jersey Greenway, which will be a pathway that goes, the old Boonton line. And there'll be a pathway that goes from Montclair all the way to Jersey City, hopefully. Right now, this bridge is turned sideways so that boat traffic can move through. So I'm not sure how they're going to cross the river at this point. We'll see. And here you can see the eastern spur of the New Jersey Turnpike and another view of this is the old Boonton line. And so this is all that we've lost. Here's the western spur of the Turnpike. And this is the other part of Sawmill. My office is right about there. And this is the Hackensack River. And here's another drone shot. Again, you have the eastern spur and the Greenway. And this is the Kearney Marshes. During low tide, you can still see a lot of the old cedar stumps. And so we're going to be using these cedar stumps to help us build the marsh back up and hopefully one day be covered by grasses. Because when you think about one of the reasons why this area of the meadows hasn't been built up like Hoboken is because it's so mucky. Anything you put on it just sinks. So these stumps provide a little bit of stability. So we want to build off of that stability. We'll be using other cues that we observe on site, taking what seems to be naturally working and trying to mimic those conditions. So we found these patches of Spartina alterniflora on top of some of the old stumps. So we're real excited to see that and try to mimic that. We also see how wildlife really uses any last bit of marsh, any kind of structure. This is one of the old tie gates right on the river. And I hope you can see some of the terrapin hanging out on the old stumps. So they really rely on that structure. We'll also follow some of the lessons learned from a salt marsh restoration project I worked on Staten Island. This is from Fresh Kills about 15 years ago. We brought in clean sand and built some strong marsh edges using different natural materials like large woody debris, and then replant with a lot of native grasses. So we're just trying to use all natural materials. Ultimately, we hope to create breeding habitat for species like the salt marsh sparrow. We've seen salt marsh sparrow using and moving through this site, as well as we also want to create some habitat for terrapin and other threatened and endangered species. So we're real excited to move forward. Fingers crossed. Hopefully within the next month or so, we'll know if we have that money. So we have so many different projects, but I'll just dive into the last one. Not even sure. Getting there on time, so I'll try to move quickly. But I wanted to talk briefly about one of the other habitats that we're looking to restore, and that is the restoration of our closed landfills to create coastal grassland and public parks. We have this great resource, all these old landfills, and to me, it's a great opportunity. So we're looking to increase the amount of carbon that can be sequestered, provide habitat for threatened and endangered species, and create even more open space for humans to use for passive recreation. Not to mention, as I've said before, that these landfills now provide some of the greatest views in the area. These landfills tend to act like islands, cut off from other areas either by waterways or human infrastructure. And these are the lands that stretch along the edges of our waterways and wetlands, so they really serve as the coastlines for the Meadowlands. And because long-term management of landfills typically requires that no trees grow, we think it creates the perfect opportunity to create much-needed coastal grasslands, a habitat that's becoming rare in the New York and New Jersey metropolitan area. We were almost out of it, but now that Fresh Kills has started to be restored, there's a lot more coastal grasslands, so we're hoping to mimic some of that. There we go. The Keegan landfill, located in Kearney, was the last landfill to close in the Meadowlands back in 2020. It's surrounded by marsh and the community of Kearney. And so because of this connection between nature and community, it presents this great opportunity for us to get creative. This is a plan that we're looking to bring to life. It creates a series of wildlife areas and public spaces around the landfill, with the community, the primary community, being grassland. And as for the public, the view sheds alone in every direction will be stunning. We're working with the town to figure out how best to reuse these spaces and provide the community with the open space amenities, while also creating resilient coastal habitat. This is a long-term effort, and it won't be completed until long after I retire, but we're making sure that all the work that they do now to close the landfill is done with an eye on how the site will be used in the future. Erie is another one of our landfills located in North Arlington. This shot was from around the 80s, and it was closed around the year 2000. The site seemed like a good place to start experimenting with how to create more diverse grassland, because it was one of our smaller landfills. It's adjacent to one of our most productive marshes, Harrier Meadows. And the site was dominated by invasive plant species, primarily Phragmites and mugwort. So that's really what you're looking at here is primarily all mugwort. And that doesn't really provide a great habitat, and there's little biodiversity. This is also where our bird banding occurs. So we could get some good, we knew we could get some good bird usage data of the site both before restoration and after restoration. So we started by spraying herbicide on the frag and mugwort in the fall of 2022. And just a quick note, we are trying to move away from the use of herbicides, but we still do use them occasionally when we're looking at something like this, where there's little more that we can do other than if we just pulled everything all out, including the soil, but then we would have to find some place to put it. In the winter, we brought in some clean soil, and then in the spring of 2023, we used a few different seed mixes of grasses and forbs and spread them across the top of the landfill. We also manually pulled any invasive or non-native plants that grew through the spring and the summer. And by late summer, we had a real diverse mix of both seeded and volunteer grasses and forbs across the site. This is a shot of one of the seeded areas taken in the summer of 2023 that was dominated by broom sedge, purple lovegrass, and panicum, all natives. And here's that same area this winter. Moving forward, we're trying to restore the entire landfill with native grassland, but right now our efforts are only focused on one section of the top, mostly because that's all our little staff can handle. But we do have plans to reseed the whole site and try to create a much stronger ecological connection between the grassland and the adjacent salt marsh. And our bird data indicated a marked increase in both numbers and diversity. The data is very exciting, but we're still working through it. And we'll be collecting more as we move forward, but hopefully soon we'll publish our results. This is yet another view from landfill 1E. This is looking out across the Sawmill Creek Wildlife Management Area towards Secaucus and East Rutherford. Way in the back, you can see the stadium. I like to imagine the day when you can look out and see nothing but a sea of grass rather than this big mud flat. Mud flats are important habitats, but we've got plenty of mud flats, and we're getting more and more every day. But what we're trying to do is create a better balance for a more resilient ecosystem into the future. But between the mud flats and the landfills, there is so much great potential for creating a lot more biodiversity in the meadows. We have a small but mighty team that works on all these efforts. And we have an agency and a state government that supports us. Fingers crossed that continues through the next governor's election. And hopefully this will continue well into the future. There's a lot more going on, as I mentioned, but I hope I've been able to convey to you the complexity of issues that we're working through in this uber urban environment. And while we try to preserve, restore, reclaim, and protect some of the last bits of wilderness in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. I also hope that I've convinced you that the New Jersey meadows are a patchwork of extremely important and valuable habitats that have shown that they are resilient when we leave them alone. But given the ongoing stressors and the urban nature of the ecosystem, we need to provide some sort of assistance in this recovery to move forward towards a more sustainable trajectory. And last, I hope I've convinced you that the stories we tell about the Meadowlands and the words we use to describe them are important for preserving and protecting them into the future, not just for wildlife, but for all of us. And that's pretty much all we can do while we're here is try to assist with the recovery of the meadows and try to stop the harms that keep getting thrown at them. There aren't too many remaining wild urban sites like this, especially wild sites that are seen every day by millions of people that live, work, and travel through here. So thank you again for your time and your attention. And it's been such a pleasure to talk to you about one of the places I truly love, the badass Meadowlands. Also, I'd like to note these two sources down here, these two videos. One is from 1973, I believe, and the other's from 1980, and they are treasures. If you ever get a chance to watch them, I highly recommend. I would have shown it today, but it was too much. But thank you. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the question is there still issues with toxins and contaminants? And yes, the Hackensack River a few years ago was declared to be a Superfund site, which I work very closely with the Hackensack River Keeper and the New York, New Jersey Bay Keeper, and I'm even on the board for the Bay Keeper. But I told those guys, I'm like, you guys are making our job harder to try to restore these areas. So what we've been trying to do is work very closely with EPA up until recently, and try to show, when you look at the other Superfund projects like Passaic River, the Housatonic up in Massachusetts, even the Berries Creek, which is in the Meadowlands, they study these sites for decades. And so the remedy that they come up with these sites is pretty much always the same. So what I've suggested is that we already know the answer. So let's move forward. Let's go with the restoration, and the Sawmill project will be a true test of that, to show how we can move forward quickly without waiting decades. Berries Creek is moving into its first phase, and what they're doing is removing sediment from the creeks and taking them well off site. I'm not sure where. But the marshes themselves, they're not touching because those old contaminants are so far down and they're not being released in any sense of the word. There's also been a number of studies done both in the Meadowlands and other areas around this region that looked at the tissues of spiders, fish, and birds, and they're not finding toxins moving through the systems. So what this is showing us is that even though there are still some legacy of contaminants, enough time has passed that the system has sort of helped itself. And it's also been helped by a number of restoration projects. We started restoring the Meadowlands back in the 80s. My first project was a 200-acre restoration in 1997. So these restoration projects, along with just time and natural physical and chemical properties, has allowed these toxins to either be buried or be moved away. So yeah, it's something that we deal with all the time. And I do have to fight with some people who say we should not restore anything because of this legacy of contaminants. And my point is, the wildlife's already here. We need to create the habitat for the wildlife that's already here. And I've shown you through the different data that wildlife is healthy, surviving, reproducing. So we need to move forward and stop looking back. Thank you. Sure. The question was regarding carbon sequestration. Let me see how to put this simply. So the plants, we've done tests in Sawmill, and we monitored areas that were vegetated as well as the mudflat areas. And what we found is that the areas where there's vegetation, we measured that the carbon was being drawn into the plants and into the soil, and where the mudflats are, carbon is being released. So what we know is, like the landfills, what they want us to do is just mow them flat. And you can see one landfill that's owned by New Jersey DEP right off of the turnpike, and it's completely shorn. It's just a lawn. So that's not sequestering any carbon. Whereas where we can get away with it, the landfills that we have, we're letting them grow. We're letting them grab that carbon, bring it into the soil where it's stored. But our tidal marshes are really good at sequestering carbon. So as we watch that erosion occurring, that's letting carbon out. It's showing the opposite process. So that is another reason why we need to be urgent in our restoration of the meadows. Yes. I'm not sure. That area is owned by Hudson County. We do know with the building of the new Portal Bridge, that some of those wetlands were lost as impacts for that bridge. We understand that's the problem in the Meadowlands with all of the infrastructure we have, the rail lines and the roadways. There's always going to be impacts to our wetlands as they maintain and improve. So that's another reason why we have this urgent need for restoration. But that particular area, we were very concerned about the work on the Portal Bridge. So we had a small grant to study the area to see how the wildlife would react to this what's called short-term construction, but it's at least 5 years. And then there's going to do the southern portal. One that was built now is the northern Portal Bridge. They're going to take down the existing Portal Bridge and put up a southern one, another one. So we looked at the salt marsh sparrow, the osprey, the terrapin, peregrine falcon that all breed right there where the Portal Bridge is because not many people are usually there. And now all of a sudden there's this whole population, human population. But what we found, they're badass. They were not affected at all by all the work. The first year, the osprey did not nest in that particular platform, but last year there were 3 nests all around the construction. We worked with USGS, who gave us these satellite tags that we could put on the terrapin. They're very expensive and they fall off pretty quickly as the terrapin shed their scuds. But we were able to see, these guys were from Florida, so we had 3 tags, and they named the terrapin John, Bon, and Jovi. So we were able to track Jovi traveling through the Portal Bridge construction, so they were able to move freely. So what the future is for that area, I'm not sure, but we're trying to keep an eye on it to make sure that it's still used by our threatened and endangered species. Okay, well, there's a whole, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not, that's owned by Hudson County, so I'm not sure. Yes. Yes. New Jersey is been, ever since Sandy, has done a great job of coordinating both the agencies and the coastal communities. So on the agency side, there's something called the New Jersey Interagency Council on Coastal Climate Resiliency, NJIAC, but it monthly, everyone, one person from every agency in the state gets together and we talk about these climate and coastal issues. On the other side, connected to the NJIAC is the NJCRC, the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative, and it's literally a collaboration of communities, municipalities, universities, agencies, private consulting firms, everyone that's working on the coast. And that includes people from Forsyth who are doing a lot of wetland restoration work and also a lot of monitoring. So we are talking all the time, and through the NJCRC, we hold regular workshops and conferences to share all that information. And I've been told by others who have seen, and that was part of the reason we got this $72 million from NOAA, because they were so impressed by how the state has been working on these coastal issues. And I've been told by others from New York and other surrounding states that New Jersey really is leading the way on those efforts. So that's pretty cool to see. Yes. Not a silly question. Out west, unfortunately. We're just shipping the problem elsewhere. That's why we need to use less and recycle. There is one on the Hudson, I'm not sure. On the Hackensack, there is one barge that comes from the BCUA, the Bergen County wastewater treatment plant. It's sludge. And a funny little fact, the guy, supposedly what I've heard, he named the barge after his ex-wife. But that's really the only big traffic we see on the Hackensack River these days. I know that, but I don't remember. I think it gets put on trains and shipped west. Yes. Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, Don Torino is going to be giving a tour of the Harrier Meadows, I believe on May 2nd or 3rd, something Saturday. The Hackensack Riverkeeper has boat tours. The NJSEA has free public boat tours. Check our website, but they do fill up quickly. And I plan on working with the folks from the museum to set up any tours that you would like to have. We regularly bring people out to special areas. We're currently working on a park named after Congressman Steve Rothman. It'll be in Carlstadt, and that'll be a new area open to the public where you go up onto this area that was filled with some rock that was blasted in Jersey City and placed into the Meadowlands. It was going to be this big development. Fortunately, it was stopped by the Riverkeeper and Congressman Rothman and others. And so this park it's a small park, about 6 acres, but it brings you up and provides you with this beautiful view of the meadows, the stadium, the river. So yes, there's a lot of opportunities. Yes, it's kind of on the other side of the meadows from the Barge Club in Carlstadt. Yeah, we do air monitoring there and we measure the tidal water elevations. I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to look. Yes. We own a lot of the land. We don't own much of the land. Uh, that's kind of a weird answer. If you come to DeCourt Park, where our offices are located, you'll see a lot of open land that we don't own that's now being turned into warehouses. So where you don't see warehouses, we own. But unfortunately, most of what we own now is either wetland or landfill. No, it's privately owned. Yes, they do. They do. That doesn't mean we approve of everything. I I don't think it'll ever be housing. That was the original plan when those lands, that was all part of the was that Xanadu? I don't I don't remember. It was all going to be originally this golf courses and housing and all sorts of different things, but then that ran out of money, and so then the area was bought by a private company, and that's who's developing the warehouses. A couple of they do own a couple of the landfills there, but they cannot be redeveloped. Yes. Well, you saw my favorite one, which was holding the eagle. And that eagle, which was, this big, that was only 3 weeks old. But on landfill 1E, I did see a coyote. But the like I mentioned, the ARUs, they're really the coolest thing because like the Atlantic coast leopard frog, we we haven't been able to see one. We can only hear it. There was a researcher from Virginia who came up and finally got a picture where we know they are, but we haven't been able to see them ourselves. So just knowing that they're there, the tricolored bat, we were told that it was likely to be listed as endangered or threatened. And so, but we were told, oh, but they're not in the Meadowlands. They're in Bergen County, but not in the Meadowlands. And we were like, why? So we put the ARUs out and found them all over. So we're really excited about that. And what that does is, we have some protections over our wetlands, but not over our uplands. And so finding out that these species use these lands, that gives them a little bit of protection. So we're trying to find these everywhere so that we can protect them. So to me, all of those are just amazing encounters. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. And I'll see you in the meadows.